Well, shall I throw some questions at you guys?
All right.
Please do.
I'm going to pick them semi-randomly, but the first questions are from Nigel. So let's
Okay.
go for what elements of Bob and Maida do you see on each other? Robin, you can start.
Well, Bob and Maida were totally incompetent technically. They could change a bulb, but that was about it. And it's either me or Tom, I'm not sure which of us, but one of us is a bit like that. Totally incompetent technically. Yeah. I don't know what I don't know. It's too difficult. I can't see. I think I'm different from my parents. I'd like to relate a bit. There's another question that came up from Angus about, hey, your background is full of teachers. Why aren't you teachers? And I think that in my case, in hindsight, that was a close run thing. I could easily become a teacher. In fact, when I retired from being an engineer, I looked into becoming a teacher at the age of whatever I was, 60 or something. So I thought I'd quite like that. And but when I found out I had to go to university for 4 years before I could become a teacher, I thought, oh, that's too much, you know. I was dead by then. Well, I wasn't, but I thought I would be. So I didn't become a teacher, but I always had an interest in education.
Yeah.
And I was on school boards and all that sort of stuff.
Well, you'd have been an excellent teacher, and I'd have been a rubbish teacher. And it's interesting that Maida's father made his name when he was about 25 by writing a very good book on primary school education, the theory of education. But then he became a headmaster and lost all interest in it. And Maida thought it was a terrible mistake that he spent 10 years of his life just doing bugger all and being grumpy and miserable. And she said to me, don't for heaven's sake become a teacher unless you really want to. And I didn't want to. So I was very glad I didn't end up there. Though I was, one or two people offered me teaching jobs because I could have taken the games and played hockey and so on. And Maida herself taught before she got married, she taught briefly and found that very difficult and stressful because she could only keep order by performing like brilliantly, like prime with Mr. Brodie, and it was totally exhausting. It wasn't really natural. She was delighted to get out of it. So there was a genetic side to it, but it didn't really hit me.
Well, hang on, you've missed out what your job was. I mean, you educated hundreds of thousands of children across Great Britain for about 20 years.
I loved doing that. I loved doing that. That was perfect for me. I didn't want to have the contact. I could, it's very, you give the whole time as a teacher, particularly in primary schools. You'll never have a break. They're always at you, demanding your attention. I couldn't have coped with that. I need time to myself. My technical incompetence I share with Bob big time. But he did have, I think he had an influence on me. He had such a wide range of interests: painting, music, books, classics. He was never ever bored, and I think that sort of rubbed off on me a bit. That having wide interests and not getting bored is very important. As far as
I think also his interest in sport and Maida's interest in sport encouraged him, and you know, and it was dead easy to encourage Tom and me. I mean, we had a school playing field with cricket nets, tennis nets, goalposts. You know, what else could we have wanted to encourage us to play sports? And I can remember, I'm just thinking about it. Tom and I used to go down to the school field. I mean, we devised a game of kicking a rugby ball over the post to be caught by the other guy on the other side. And the idea was to eventually drive him further and further back with long kicks so he couldn't kick back to you that far through the post.
Yeah.
And he won that round and started the game.
Well, it was very good for both of us that we both like sport, and you really need somebody to muck about with.
Yeah, because the best sport we played on the school field was at the end of the academic year when Bob made entertain the school prefects, and we had bicycle hockey.
Yes.
Do you remember playing bicycle hockey?
Yeah.
Roaring around on bikes with a hockey stick.
Yeah.
And if you weren't going to get there first, you rammed your stick in the spokes of the opponent.
What was it like when England won the World Cup in 1966?
Well, I could talk about this because I was there. After I left university, it's just after we got married, in fact, I joined the BBC, starting off in radio as something called a studio manager that I set up mics, edited stuff, did sound effects, that sort of thing. And I didn't much like it. I wasn't any good at it and I didn't like it. But the highlight was 1966, when England was staging the World Cup, and at Wembley, all the big games happened. And the BBC was charged with providing commentary sites and equipment for commentators from 35 countries. And these were radio commentators. Television was a separate thing. And a studio manager was assigned for each of the 35. So I was sent along to set up a mic for somebody an hour before the game started, make sure it was working, and then stand behind him throughout the match to check up that nothing went wrong. Nothing ever did go wrong. So I watched every single England game at Wembley including the final. And just a little aspect of this, if you remember what happened in the final, England were 2-1 up with 2 minutes to go. And then the bloody Germans scored an equalizer. But where we were, the radio commentary spots, we were one side and the television commentators and the pictures were the other side. And from where we were, we could all see, and all the radio commentators could see, that a German had clearly handled it in the penalty area just before they scored the goal. And the referee couldn't see it, and none of the commentators picked up on it in television. But they shouldn't have gone to extra time, but it did, and thank God it did.
Let's go to the last of Nigel's questions, which was basically, how much do you think growing up post-war influenced the adults that you turned out to be? I think it's a general observation about what was life like after the war.
Well, I mean, post-war, one of the things I think was that during the wartime, we had a very healthy diet. And I think the whole of England did. You know, we didn't eat chocolate, sweets, sugar, all those sorts of things. And I'm sure that probably had a lasting effect on our generation of people. But post-war, of course, you know, we definitely came out the winners of the war, and we knew it. And I think nowadays we realise that we really weren't the winners, the Americans were. It was slightly different. But anyhow, I think we came out of the war with a sense of pride, and you know, we'd done it despite all.
And the other good thing was that when we were growing up, life got a bit better the whole time. The country was really poor in 1945. It was pretty grim for people who've been used to a relatively cushy life in the 30s. Suddenly there was a shortage of everything, shortage of food. We never had a car, for instance, till about 1955, about 10 years later. And I remember when I was a very young kid, I didn't have any toys at all. I had one wooden brick that I was quite fond of. And there was a toy train that didn't work, and that was it. And I didn't mind this. It was I couldn't believe it when every Christmas things got a bit better, and the world seemed to be sorting itself out. For the first 10 years after the war, things seemed to be getting slowly better. So that was quite a comforting.
Well, there was a lot of make do after the war.
Make do and mend, yeah.
because of the shortage of things.
Yeah.
And in particular, one story I can recall, Maida making clothes for us and making some rugby shorts for Tom. Do you remember the story?
No.
When you're at the Dragon.
Yeah.
Well, Maida made you some rugby shorts, and you went off, put them on with great pride, went off and had a game, came back. Maida said, "How did the shorts go?" And he said, "Well, they're a bit itchy, a bit scratchy, actually." "Oh, I don't know why that is." So she had a look at them, and round the bottom of each leg, Maida had left all the pins in. Where she hemmed it all, intending to hem the leg at the bottom. And she put the pins in to mark it and then left them in. And Tom played a game of football with about 20 pins on each leg, digging into his little thighs.
We've done Nigel's questions, but we have a few more from Michael. So what attribute about the other do you appreciate the most?
Well, I'll say this. Robin was fantastically nice to me when I was his young brother. And then before Robert eventually went off when I was 10, he was off to Berkhamsted. But that early 10 years, it was brilliant because I often used to feel rather sorry for myself. I was rather a gloomy little bugger. And he would always make me laugh. When I was trying to feel sorry for myself, he could always make me laugh. And I was furious that he could make me laugh and I wanted to be miserable, but he did make me laugh. And he was a real rock for me for that first 10 years.
What do I appreciate about Tom most of all? I think it was the way he coped with looking after Maida and Bob dying, because I wasn't there.
Yeah.
And maybe I've never said thank you for that, but
well, it was a pleasure.
Did you get up to as boys or young men that you're grateful your own children did not?
Well, the thing I think I'm ashamed of is that I got up to absolutely bloody nothing. And I really hope my children got up to rather more than I did.
Robin, is there anything you want to say?
I'm a bit like Tom. Yeah, I never really got up to anything bad. And I think that was a mistake.
Let's pick off the next question then about blackmail, because that's a good one. So if you had to blackmail the other one for some reason, what would you threaten to reveal?
Well, the trouble is, as Robin and I have just been saying, we're so innocent. There's not a lot, to be honest.
I mean, we met many times and always enjoyed it. But we never really got up to things together. No, things that come into the blackmail category. I wish we had.
I know.
Do you think you sound like inherently not taking too many risks? Is that something you would have inherited from Bob and Maida?
I don't know. I've always been cautious, safety first sort of person, and fearing the worst. And I don't know where that comes from, but that's certainly one of my characteristics. Not doing anything. To do anything. I've occasionally done something, taken a risk, but it's a calculated risk, and I'm pretty sure I'd get away with it. Whatever it was I was doing.
And what about you, Robin?
Well, I mean, I guess coming out to Australia was taking a risk.
Yeah.
But I always made sure I had enough money to get a ticket back to England if I had to. I guess that's a bit of a risk, but paid off.
Yeah.
And
I remember.
How did the cost of a ticket? Sorry, how did the cost of a ticket to get back compared to now? Was it 4 times what it would cost to fly back now, or was it?
Oh, more like 10 times, I think.
Yeah.
Oh, right.
It was very expensive.
Well, I was very touched that Robin came over to my wedding, because it was half his salary or something ridiculous. Actually, I mean, to give you an idea of the sort of quiet lives we led, my stag night consisted of walking over the road with Robin to the Eastgate pub and having half a pint of beer and then walking back home. That was it.
Yeah.
And it's partly that stag nights were not big things then.
Right.
And you know, people didn't go off for 4 days to Iceland or something. But nonetheless,
Well, I didn't have any of that.
yeah.
And mainly because I got married in Townsville, which was, I was living in Melbourne, Townsville, 2,000 kilometres away or more.
Yeah.
And none of my friends were going to go up to Townsville for my wedding. And Bob Mader said, look, we'll come for your wedding or we'll come out later and see you. And we said, come out later and see us, because when we're on our wedding, we'll be busy doing other things. But when we walked into the cathedral, you know, the bride's family sits on the left and the bridegroom's family sits on the right, and the whole cathedral leant over to the left because there was nobody on my side at all. The only person I knew, this is almost not quite true, but almost true, the only person I knew at my wedding was Rosie.
Yeah.
I mean, I had met her parents and I had met her sister, but I hadn't met my best man, who was Ross, Prue's boyfriend at the time.
Yeah.
So it was a strange sort of wedding in many ways.
Yeah.
Very one-sided.
Yeah.
Oh.
But going back to risks, I mean, that is the brave. You take a risk when you get married. You know, nobody is absolutely, or very few people are absolutely confident that this is right. You know, you think it took courage to go through with that. I think every man does, and woman. You know, it's a risk for everybody, and thank God it's worked out and paid out. Yeah. But maybe Toby and Robert will come up with a few questions as well, which they haven't.
And Jill's got quite a long list.
Jill's got some questions too.
Yeah.
So there's some more, and it'd be nice to.
There's a bit more to do.
I just remind them that I don't answer questions like that. I don't want grandchildren talking about my sex life out of bounds.
Jill suggested, are there any stories you found very funny stories or jokes or whatever that particularly make you laugh? Now, I've got something a little story I could tell. Jill very much had in mind the episode when it was your birthday. Do you remember this? And you were told to close your eyes, all your family around you, to close your eyes.
You were hosting in Canberra, and so this must be Jessica was like 3. This is like when we went to that place on the coast, and she fell asleep. Yeah. We were able to put her under the table and carry on drinking as a result. But anyway, that's a different story. But I think there was a time it was your birthday, and we were sat there all around the table. Rosie lit the candles on a fantastic cake, and we said, make a wish. So you shut your eyes, you blew out the candles, and you opened your eyes, and you went, oh, you're all still here.
Well, Jill also suggested that we should talk about the naughtiest thing we've ever done, at least while at school. And I remembered something that happened to me at the Dragon School, when for some reason we were given a half holiday. I must have been about 9 or 10 at the time. And Rodney Goodwin, my chum, and I went off towards the parks, and somebody tagged along with us called Tommy Bloxham, who was basically a bad boy, and we were called good boys. And when we got to the parks, there was one of the workers, you know, who look after it, the park attendants, had a bonfire, and he was raking leaves onto it and burning old leaves, and he'd taken his coat off and put it down beside it. And we did something, I forget what it was, walked on the wrong bit of grass or something, and he swore at us and said, fuck off, or something to that effect. And we took exception to this. But when he then disappeared, and Tommy Bloxham, the bad boy, ran over, picked up the chap's overcoat and dropped it on the fire. And we were Rodney and I were pretty horrified. We didn't know what to do. We couldn't get it off. we scarpered. Unfortunately, the wife of a member of staff had spotted us and reported us. So doom descended. And I was, as a result of this, I got 6 of the best with a slipper, and from my housemaster, as it were. And I felt, far from being scarred for life, because I never ever had any other corporal punishment, I felt a total release of guilt. I felt I had totally deserved this, and I have nothing but relief for the whole thing. Anyway, where do we go from here?
Well, we could do questions from Toby/Toby's children.
Yeah, yes.
Yeah, okay.
The
Go
first
for it.
question is, when did you first buy a house and how much did you pay for it? I'm actually curious where you were living before that moment as well.
Well, I bought my house in Canberra. Well, when I moved to Canberra from Melbourne in 1968, under the arrangements, the whole department I was in moved from Melbourne to Canberra, and we were given sort of council housing, if you like, to get everybody started. So we had what we call a government house, which we were entitled to buy after we had lived in it or rented it for 3 years. And so that's just what we did. We lived in it and rented it for 3 years, and then I bought it, and it cost, give or take, $10,000.
What would that have been in sterling?
About
roughly
£5,000.
Yeah.
And then I added an extension to it later, sort of doubled the cost, or I can't remember the numbers now.
Yeah.
So, but maybe in actual dollar notes invested at the time, probably about 25,000 altogether dollars, and it's now worth about 800,000.
Yeah, I know. Weren't we the lucky ones?
50 years later, I have to say.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, in my case, I remember we bought Warple Street in 1965, 2 up, 2 down little cottage for £4,750. I remember that very clearly, which would be about 10,000 Australian dollars.
Yeah.
And it's been a help to us buying a house at that particular time. And I'm afraid our generation will be luckier that either Alex's children generation or grandchildren. It was a one-off thing, and but thank God it did happen. It's bailed us out no end.
Well, I mean, I in Canberra, how do young people buy houses? But they do, and you lose track as you grow older and you stop earning money yourself. You lose track about the rate at which inflation happens, and we find now the houses around where we live, $800,000 or thereabouts. And young people come and buy them. I mean, Torrens has now turned into almost a young person's suburb.
Next question then from Toby and family is scariest moments.
I remember when I was about 5 or 6 down at MCS, I went down on my own over the first bridge, little Chinese bridge, white bridge, and turned right onto the spit, and there was a big log there. A trunk had fallen, a tree had fallen down. I went to inspect it, and a snake crawled out from underneath it, about 3 foot long. Now, I think it was probably a grass snake, not a poisonous snake. But although I'd never heard that snakes were bad and evil and horrible, I was absolutely petrified. I can remember blind panic seized me, and I ran at 400 miles an hour back up to MCS and hurled myself through the door and shot it behind me. And I've never been so frightened in my life as that moment. But of course, we spared that. But going back to snakes and spiders with you, Toby's children also wanted to know, they want to hear some grisly tales of experiences with spiders and snakes in the house. Have you had any, have you ever been bitten by them?
We've never had a snake in the house. We've had snakes outside the house. We had spiders in the house, yeah. and we get bitten occasionally, but nothing of any consequence. But the other scary thing I had was on my honeymoon. We were on our first day after the wedding. Rosie and I were driving back to Townsville because we were going to fly off to Dunk Island. And we stopped to have a picnic on the river bank, and there's a big sandy bank. It was all very pleasant. And we sat down, spread out the rug, had a picnic, and suddenly realized on the sand all around us were rather large footprints of crocodiles.
Oh my God. Oh.
We thought, hey, we better not stay here much longer. I don't think we ever saw a crocodile, but we saw the footprints. They were definitely around.
Oh.
That was a scary moment, yeah. I thought I might lose my wife on the first day if I wasn't married.
Well, following on from the sort of arriving in Australia and getting married and everything, the next question from Toby is, how long was it before you felt Australian?
Rather than British.
And it maybe it's
it varied on the topic, did it?
Yeah.
It varied on the topic. Some things I definitely stayed English longer than others, and they tended to be sporting events. When there was cricket on, it took me a long time to switch my allegiance from one side to the other, rugby and all that sort of stuff. But, you know, I think I probably became Australian after 4 years or something of that sort. I mean, after 4 years, I'd married Rosie, and it was obvious I was going to hang around in Australia. It was no longer a short-term plan to come out to Australia and see the world and then go back to England. That plan had been shot. So it was obvious I was going to stay in Australia. And I guess that's when you became Australian or felt Australian. Formally, I didn't become an Australian until Gough Whitlam was in power. And I'm trying to put a date to that, 72 or something of that sort. And he basically said, if you want to be a public servant in Australia, then you've got to be an Australian. So I applied. And the interesting thing was, it was very easy to apply. It was all done over the mail. And Bob Mader were out here at the time. And I thought, if they knew I'd taken this step to become Australian, I didn't surrender my British passport, but I did get the additional Australian. And I thought Bob Mader might get a bit upset if they see this that happened. And so I said to Rosie, Bob Mader was staying with us, I said to Rosie, look, I'm expecting a letter in the mail, heavily embossed with on Her Majesty's service and all that sort of stuff, giving me my certificate. And so if it comes, just hide it quickly and I'll see it when I get back from work. And as chance had it, Mader intercepted the postman on that day and came out with this intriguing envelope on Her Majesty's service written on the top and all that sort of fancy embossed stuff. And she wanted to know what it was. And I never told her. She said, oh, nothing. It has something to do with the rates on the house or made up some story and put it to one side. Yeah. But I never told her.
Now, this is a lovely old photo of, I'd like it anyway, because it's a fantastic photo for 1900 of a happily married old couple just pottering around in the conservatory. It could be a painting by Rembrandt of an old couple or something of that sort. Yeah. It's just a great thing. It's a lovely frame. And if the house caught fire, the first thing I'd fish out of the house is this picture, actually.
Oh, good.
It really is.
I'm glad you might go for Mum's second, perhaps.
Sorry?
You might get Mum's second. Okay.
I'm not sure about that.
Tom, I couldn't quite. see I remember the photograph. Who's
Yeah.
in it?
Well, it's
Who's in it?
Annie McTaggart, Thomas Hollis Hopkins, and Annie McTaggart.
Yeah. Wow.
I'm just going to hang this picture up.
Okay. Well, Dad's hanging the picture up, Robin. Another question is a favorite toy or a storybook or both. Can you remember anything that your first favorite toy?
Tom was my favourite toy.
Oh.
No, I can't.
I was
remember
Winnie the Pooh to his Christopher Robin.
Yeah. No, I can't remember any particular, you know.
Well, I
or-
can remember a favourite book because there's a sort of family story. This, as it turned out, around about age 7, I got really keen on a children's writer called Thornton Burgess, who wrote stories about animals. And I found this in the public library that I discovered I could go to the children's section. And this wonderful book was called Paddy the Beaver. And I adored it. I read it thousands of times. And I discovered then that there are about 10 other books in the series. And I rushed back to get hold of these books. And I found that most of them were already out, because unknown to me, because I didn't know her at the time, 7-year-old Eleanor had also gone off to the public library. She was very keen on, and she was very keen on Thornton Burgess. And she was furious when she couldn't get hold of Paddy the Beaver, where of course I had it. And I was furious because I couldn't get hold of Freddie the Fox because she had it. And unfortunately, this bond has brought us together in later life. So I wouldn't say I've read one of them for some time.
What about favorite book, Dad? Well, what about favorite brick?
Yes. Oh, yeah. Well, it's pathetic. This is wartime shortages. You know, when I had very few toys as a child from up to the age of 6. When about 1947, things started picking up, and all I remember, there was one utterly useless model steam engine, a wind-up thing that didn't work, and I wasn't very interested anyway. The other thing I had was a brick about that, you know, that long, that wide, just like a wooden brick. That's all it was. But I was devoted to this wooden brick. This is what saved my sanity, having a wooden brick to hold on to. It was a great life being a child then.
What do you do with a brick?
You just hold it and you put it up vertically, you put it horizontally. It's like Eeyore pottering around with a burst balloon, you know.
One of Michael's great concepts that I really like is he talks about different types of work, and there's kind of good work, and then there's great work. You know, those really special projects that really they're unusual. They take things into new directions. And for each of you, is there one project or even 2 projects that you look back on and you think that was special?
I was working in an odd place in the sense that once you sign a document to buy a fleet of F-18 airplanes at $4 billion, you're really tied to the contractor. You don't want to cancel no matter what happens. He doesn't want you to cancel either. So you're sort of stuck with each other. It's not like if you're trying to buy a car or whatever, where you can say, well, enough is enough, I'm not buying it anymore. Deal's off, go away. You can't do that when you buy an airplane. So I came across a concept called partnering, which had been used by the American Army, I think, to do big projects. And basically what partnering said was, look, if you get into a really big project, like in the $1 billion region, where neither wants to cancel, but things are bound to go wrong in it somewhere, what you've got to do is to become partners and not look at the fine print of the contract, but look at the real intent of what you're trying to do. And for example, you know, if your planes are being delivered late, you don't go to the contract and say, well, that's $1 million a day penalty you've got to pay. You go to the contract and say, look, that's the worst case situation. But if you can give us something that will compensate, that won't cost you too much, like, additional spares or whatever it might be,
Yeah.
you do the sort of partnership arrangement.
Yeah.
And I tried to introduce that into Department of Defense. And I have to say I failed. But that was a sort of highlight in a way of trying to do really good work, trying to do something out of the box,
Yeah.
trying to do something that was different.
Dad, is there anything you would?
Well, I suppose there was one later in about 1990, I think this was. I don't know, about 2000. I did a series on called The Victorian Diary, which is a 5 dramatized episodes about the life of a young girl who has a dreadfully tough time at school and later on finally makes it. And she's had the plot is quite complicated but very strong, as it ends up when the villain of the piece saves the heroine's piece, although they've had a terrible quarrel all their lives, saves the baby child from being run over and is herself run over. And it sounds corny, but it was very, very, it was full of history. It was a really good vehicle of Victorian history. I was proud of the way it didn't hit you on the head with the history, but it was all there for the teacher to explain. Yeah. And I found that I couldn't actually tell the story to my commissioning editor without bursting into tears. And Robert had helped me with the plot, and we sort of worked it out a bit together. And I described this embarrassing lunch I'd had with the commissioning editor when I ended up unable to finish the story. And he said, "Oh, thank God, it's not just me, Dad. I've been telling this story to my friends at university, and I burst into tears too."
Tried to tell it one Sunday lunch between the two of you, and you both burst into tears then.
You remember that?
Yeah, I do.
Yes, it had lovely music. It was really good little actors, very nice crew. Everything went well. There were so often there's bad experiences when you're making films or airplane projects like yours. Yeah. But sometimes it just happens, it goes like a dream.
Yeah.
That's what I remember with great affection.